welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach, and I'm joined today by my guest, Brennan Conway of Magpie Games. Welcome to the show, Brennan.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you back, too. You are a 3-time champion Plus One Forward guest, correct?
Yes, I have a belt to that effect that I wear on a daily basis.
So we've already asked you how you've gotten your start with Powered by the Apocalypse games, but as repeat champion guest, what playbook are you from which Powered by the Apocalypse game? What represents your championship right now?
So when I had to think about the champion playbook and the playbook that you play like when you're deep into the game, I only landed on one possibility, which is the single greatest playbook that has ever been created by anyone ever, the Space Marine Mammal for Apocalypse World. It is a dolphin in a mech suit that came down from space to check on the humans and the broken world below, and its story is one in which it slowly but surely transforms into a human, and it's amazing.
That sounds incredible. I think I've seen it. I've seen it on the table. I've never actually seen anyone play it. Have you played it before?
Oh yes, I played it for an extended campaign. I caused a lot of problems, called in nuclear strikes on humans. That was maybe a little... Look, I was provoked. I was the true victim in my dolphin-y nature. But yeah, no, it was a joy to play, and I will always hold on to the Space Marine Mammal. I know that it has been updated. I think Vincent Baker released the Space Marine as kind of a new version of it. But without the mammal, it's just missing that little something extra, that je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, a Space Marine reptile doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
No. Too cold-blooded.
So that brings us to our first segment, Read a Sitch, where Brennan and I will discuss some aspect of Powered by the Apocalypse play or table culture that he wants to cast a spotlight on.
Read a Sitch.
So what are you spotlighting today, Brennan?
For me, I wanted to talk a little bit about protagonization in the PBTA games. And part of it is I come at it heavily from the designer brain perspective, because that's a lot of what we do. That's when we play, we're thinking about how to adjust the things that we're playing. Often we're play testing. So in my head right now, I have like this combination of Zombie World, and I have Marissa Kelly's running playtests of the upcoming game Airlock, and then I have Root. And so they're all swirling around next to each other, and they got me to think about the nature of how do we communicate that the PCs at the table are the protagonists of the story? What does that even mean? What is the promise of someone being a protagonist? And how can you adjust it? Because in Zombie World, one of the things that we realized and really liked about how it worked was that you actually could make your character and they'll be there in moment one. And so based on a lot of the framework we come into the game with, it looks like, cool, of course they're protagonists. They're a PC from moment one of the game. But it turns out they die very, very quickly. I've seen this because the game is so lethal. Somebody gets shot fairly early on because two characters get into a fight, or somebody just pulls the exact wrong card out of the bite deck in Zombie World that instantly kills a character. And it turns out that this character we thought was a protagonist, we thought was the lead of the TV show, isn't. And if that had happened in, say, Apocalypse World, or Monster Hearts, or any number of other games, that would feel kind of like a betrayal, because we had spent time on this character, we were invested in them, we wanted them there. But it works perfectly in Zombie World, because the setting is itself fairly lethal, and the fiction we understand to be lethal, and you'll just get back into it with a new character in short order. So the mechanics of Zombie World are tweaked so that we don't know who the protagonists are at the start of play, which is completely different from when I think about Root, and I think about we make our characters at the start of play, and those are the main characters. They are maybe not protected exactly, but the spotlight is focused on them, and we know that they're not just going to be harshly and instantly removed from play without warning. It's going to come at the dramatically appropriate moment. So it's the kind of thing that I think for all of these PBTA games, the GM needs to be on the same page as the players about what it means to be a protagonist. And as a designer, that's one of those those dials that you can adjust to turn it up and down depending upon the kind of story you want to tell. Is it one where we know for sure that these characters are the main characters and that they will not exit the fiction except in a dramatically appropriate moment? Or is it the kind of story where really anything can happen and these characters are not by any means safe?
I was going to say, with zombie fiction in particular, from a player perspective, I think there is a certain level of understanding that life is tenuous at best. I mean, Characters you aren't going to expect to die are going to die. And that's part of the shock value that I think attracts both people to watch zombie movies and TV shows and people who are playing the game. Although I could see that maybe coming into a little bit of conflict. How do you deal with players who don't 100% buy into the way a playbook is setting them up as a protagonist? Like, they present a little bit of friction.
Mm-hmm. I think most often that comes in when somebody expects their playbook to be able to do something or to be effective at something that it then turns out that it's not necessarily great at, that the playbook is actually on a different trajectory than what they expected. And so for that's one of those learned skills of having played the game enough to really get an idea of what the playbooks are. Obviously, it can help when you design some of those playbooks, but if you have this thing in your head and you know that, for instance, the Vamp in Urban Shadows often doesn't quite 100% align with what people expect it to be, so then you as a GM can take the steps when you start the game to say, this is the actual trajectory of this thing. If you pick this playbook, this is the kind of protagonist and the kind of protagonization that you can expect. You will be effective in these ways, but you will be unprotected and ineffective, or at least in danger in these other ways. That then helps to deal with a lot of this friction beforehand. But then if it happens during play, if somebody's just completely shocked or they expected their character to be an astonishingly powerful badass, I think of the Battle Babe in Apocalypse World as an example of this, where it sounds like you're going to be one of the most effective, you're the Battle Babe, you're going to be an incredible combatant. Except the Battle Babe is actually way better at getting into trouble than actually getting out of it, really. They're kind of haphazardly effective. So if that happens during play, that a character winds up being not what a player expected, and they're having this difficulty and this friction, that comes down to one of those discussions to have, I think, outside of character, to make sure they're still having fun with that playbook. Now that they have a better sense for what it's about, maybe it's time for them to create a new protagonist. It turns out the one they made wasn't what they wanted. Or to then, in the game, try to angle things, make moves that more directly point at their protagonization, the Battle Babe's sexiness and awesomeness and coolness, and have characters be in awe of them and just impressed by them, and give them situations that they can dance in and out of. Give them a chance to express their protagonization and maybe get a taste for it.
Have you ever dealt with a situation where, when we talk about a player character being protagonist, the player has a different understanding about what that means? To cite an example, I had a friend I used to run games with named James who really was attracted to protagonists who were supporting characters, the taxi driver, not the big hero in front.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had players want to fiddle around with that space? How do you make them more of a protagonist?
Yeah, so that can come into that space of what a player wants to get out of a game, and us as a table having and honoring a discussion about that. If somebody likes kind of a quote-unquote supporting cast role, I think in this case, I go to the operator in Apocalypse World, where sometimes the operator can be somewhat less of a main focus and more of like a hanger-on to other people's stories or problems, at least as I saw it played. Then if the player is okay with that, it's possible to just go along with that. They are happy watching other people be protagonists. They're having a good time, and nobody's actually upset at the table. But if I want to draw them out, that's that slow process of asking them questions, sort of getting answers that I can then build on to then ultimately draw more attention to their particular issues. So, for example, in an Apocalypse World game I ran for a while, we had an operator who ran a train that moved between 3 different hardholds, and we had a gunlugger who was like the operator's guard on the train. And the two of them in some ways could be detached from the conflicts that we were focused on in one of the 3 hardholds centered on that hardhold. So they had a little bit more of that thing that would pull them out. They were not necessarily the ones who instantly felt like they were going to be in charge, but all it took was asking more questions to get them involved in that particular hardhold, asking them who in that hardhold they cared about, asking them why this hardhold was so important to them, getting them interested in and caring about that place, and then they inherently started taking on more of a role in determining the fate of that place, that stronger protagonist role.
Now, Brennan, at one point you mentioned Root in our first segment, so that brings us to our next segment, Open Your Brain, where we're going to chat about your new game, Root.
Open your brain.
So, what's the elevator pitch for Root?
Root, the tabletop role-playing game, is cute woodland animals meets Game of Thrones. It is based on the Root, a Game of Woodland Might and Right board game, which was put out by Leader Games about a year ago or so. And it's about the woodland, which is occupied by the denizens, foxes, rabbits, mice, all manner of woodland creature. But there are these big factions that move and wage a war for control of the woodland between themselves. And so the board game is all about that big overarching war. But one faction in the board game is the Vagabond. And the Vagabond is a single piece in a war game where all the other factions have a whole bunch of pieces. The Vagabond is a single piece wandering around the woodland, causing trouble, upsetting apple carts, building reputation, destroying other factions, helping other factions, generally being a kind of a troublemaker. And that is the role that you perform in Root, the tabletop role-playing game, where you all take on the role of these vagabonds, these figures who exist outside of normal society, who don't live in a specific clearing maybe, or who aren't really viewed as safe, who are generally mistrusted, but who will do the dirty work that needs doing, who will go into the deeper forests that are incredibly dangerous, and they will serve this important role across the woodland. All the while, this war rages on in the background, this overarching conflict between these bigger factions, and you, as the Vagabond player characters, take on the role of ultimately shaping, adjusting, winning, losing that war for those factions. Your abilities will affect who is in control of what, who is winning the war, who is losing the war, and ultimately can dictate the fate of the woodland.
Is the flexibility, if you would, of the Vagabond faction in this conflict what led to them being the star faction in the role-playing game?
Yeah, part of the problem we initially had when we were thinking about doing it as an RPG was if one person is from the faction, the Marquisat, you serve the Marquis de Cat, and so you are on one side of this large conflict, and the other character is from the Eyrie dynasties. And that means you are from a completely different faction, and these two are at each other's throats. Well, it's actually going to be kind of hard to make sense of why you would be in a group together. You are literally on opposite sides of the war. That's not a story that can't be told, but it's a story that's complicated and very specific, not least when you start entering even more factions into the mix, like the Woodland Alliance or the Riverfolk Company, or all of these additional factions create more and more tension in the holding environment of the game as a whole. Whereas if you're all vagabonds, one of you can still be from the Eyrie dynasties and perhaps deserted. One of you can be from the Marquisat and perhaps exiled by a political rival. But since you're all vagabonds, you occupy a similar space, you can move around the woodland, you can do jobs for all sides, you can build reputation or infamy with all sides. That flexibility absolutely contributes to the RPG working as a whole and giving us a good reason for this entire group of characters to be together.
From a creative standpoint, I am just curious about the transition from board game to role-playing game. Was there anything unexpected that you came upon in the process?
Yeah, the big thing we came into the RPG thinking about was that we wanted to honor the board game as much as we possibly could. We wanted to honor its systems, we wanted to honor its messages, and part of it was this realization of how many things the board game was actually saying and doing and communicating that we then had to figure out a way of bringing into the role-playing game. So for example, The board game has this amazing art by Kyle Farron, and it's all these adorable woodland creatures, but they're wearing medieval-esque clothes or armor, and they're wielding swords. And then as soon as we get into the role-playing game, we start receiving questions such as, but is a wolf actually bigger than a rabbit? Because in the real world, a wolf is bigger than a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have to answer that. Are all of these animals the exact same size, or are they different sizes based on their species? Can birds actually fly? Is that a thing? The board game shows them flying in some of the art. So can they fly in the RPG? What about questions such as these different animals, where do they get their food? Are there animals who are not denizens? The board game mentions bears in one of its cards. It says a quest given to the vagabond is to go and take care of a bear that's menacing a clearing. So what is the role of bears? All of these things of realizing that the fiction of the board game, which could be heavily implied and communicated mostly by the rules and the themes, suddenly we had to drill down on in a greater extent. We had to get some of these answers, or at the very least be able to position players to understand the core of this is more of a fable-ish setting. So some of these questions are just irrelevant to what we're actually doing. We're not going to worry about exactly whether or not all of these animals are the correct size for their kind of animal, because that's just not the kind of setting it actually is. So that entire process of adaptation, of realizing that we had to fill in these details from the board game, or at least build on the details that were already there in the board game, was something that we haven't had to do before. And I think it is particular to that transition.
I'm reminded a little bit of the Redwall novels that I read as a kid and the different artists' interpretations of, well, there's badgers and mice living together. How does that work?
Yep.
And then the books themselves just kind of hand wave it and move on. And then all the artists have different interpretation as to what's actually happening.
Yep. It's exactly in that space. We are fortunate in some ways in that regard, because all of the art is by Kyle. And so there is this consistency and this consistent vision. And the game was designed by Cole Worley, the board game. And Cole has talked on several podcasts about what he wanted out of Root, what he was thinking, where it came from. All of those things were vital for me to just ingest and really digest, to understand what the board game was doing in the first place, so I could honor it as best I possibly could. But there's still that space of, I need to give answers here, but I also need to understand that your table is your table and things may change, that when you do things, maybe you will put more of an emphasis on some of these qualities than others, and yet other things are hard-coded. A specific example, actually, is that I know it was important to Cole that the different kinds of animals are not built by inherent qualities. They are not such that the rabbits are all inherently fast, and the mice are all inherently smart, and the foxes are all inherently tricksy. They may have cultural values, they may have cultural qualities where, like, we as a culture, for the rabbits, we like to bake. That's not something inherent to us being rabbits, that's just our particular culture. But all of them are equivalent in terms of some sort of mechanical representation. Put another way, simplistically, none of them should have specific stat bonuses because they are a particular kind of animal. So that was one of those important things to bring through fairly early. One of the questions we get is, why does species not actually have any direct effect on mechanics? And that is exactly why, because species may have an effect on your social presence. If you're a lizard, you're not from the woodland. That will affect how the other denizens perceive you. But it will not just give you a +1 stat bonus to charm for you to be a lizard.
Now that we've dug into the setting and the background of the game a little bit, let's talk about the mechanics. So what makes Root different from Apocalypse World, just to start off?
Sure. You are going to play these vagabonds who are all very competent individuals, so far so Apocalypse World. But one of the things that we knew we were going to have come up in Root were big fight scenes, action scenes. All of the characters are shown like with their swords, their bows, their crossbows, and we had the sense that you're these adventurers, not quite swashbuckly, that may be a little too much, but there's that edge of swashbuckliness, that you're going to get into trouble, and you're going to do crazy things like dive out the window and do a tumble onto the ground below. Our earliest playtests were defined by exactly this kind of action sequence in between the stints of bribery or trickery or persuasion, and understanding then that the action scenes were going to be just as important as the quote-unquote non-action scenes, meant that we wanted to put an emphasis on those action scenes and how to have fun with them, while bringing in one of the pieces of the board game. The board game for the Vagabond character focuses on equipment. Equipment is a very important part of what the Vagabond is able to do in the board game, where you get more and you can exhaust it to do useful things. So we knew we wanted equipment, we knew we wanted the action scenes, so we developed a whole system of weapon moves that is designed to help bring out and flesh out the combat that you will get into. Weapon moves are based on your own particular skills and the weapons you wield. And this took a few iterations to get really right. Originally, we were just like, what if each weapon came with a specific move, and as long as you held the weapon, you could do it? That led to some strangeness, where it felt like I could hand this sword to anybody, and suddenly they could do this exact same crazy maneuver that I could do. That felt weird. So it took a little bit to get right, but over time it helped us build this engaging sort of action-y combat system.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if your character is a badass swordsman or swordswoman or swordsperson, and that quality is intrinsic to the weapon, then how is your character a protagonist then, right?
Exactly. It took away the specialness of some of the characters. When the Arbiter was like, look, I'm looking at my playbook, I'm looking at my image, and it's telling me I should be this big, scary, badass warrior, but there's something about my sword such that all I need to do is hand it to the tiny little tinker, and they can do the same thing. It just did not work. But all it took was understanding that and then making it a matter of you need the skill and you need a weapon that will allow you to do that thing. So the equipment still matters. If you lose your sword, a bunch of your special skills are taken away from you. But you still have to have those skills. So you can't just give the giant sword to the tinker and have them be as effective. So that's one of the big things that really separates it. And another that I'm especially fond of is reputation. All of the Vagabonds have reputation with the different factions at play, where you can earn infamy with them or you can earn prestige with them. And that means you can eventually get to the place where they're giving you things almost for free. They're helping to supply you. You could be leading some of the faction's soldiers into battle. You essentially can choose to become part of a faction by helping them and getting them to like you. Or you can get them to hate you and have them run you out of town when they see that you've come in and have them hunt you down. And it's actually easier, based on the tracks, to lose reputation than it is to gain reputation. A representation of how in the board game, you gain reputation slowly, one bit at a time. But all it takes is for you to remove a single piece from another faction, and instantly you will drop down into hostility and they will dislike you.
I really like the reputation track because it gives the player some say in who the antagonist in their story is going to be. You're allowed to kind of go like, these people, I think these people are jerks. I'm going to blow up my reputation with them, so they have to come for me.
Yep. And it allows for a certain amount of inter-party bickering, conflict, interesting decisions to be made there, because if we as a group come into town, our reputations overlap on top of each other. So if we're all well-loved, that's great. We're going to be especially well-loved. If we're all hated, we're going to be especially hated. But you can arrive in these situations where one of you has made a point to make the Marquisat miserable, and you've done everything in your power to ruin the Marquisat's forces. And so then when you get into a clearing controlled by the Marquisat, your friends are hiding you. They're trying to tell you to keep your head down, don't be seen, so that your very bad reputation won't come up and cause trouble for the rest of the group, which then leads to all manner of fun. And like, how do you hide them? You put them in a box and you hope nobody notices the little cat paws as you crawl around the clearing, and so on and so forth.
So now we've got into all the new mechanics to root. What's your favorite move in the game and why?
So that one is a little tough because I do like a bunch of the playbook moves. I'm excited for some of the Tinker moves in particular. We now have a jury rig move. It went through a couple of manners of revision of thinking like, well, maybe we don't need this move, but the Tinker, everybody who played it kept wanting to make things on the fly, make quick devices, traps, interesting things on the fly. And so we wound up having to put it back in, and I actually think it's going to work great for exactly that purpose. Both that synchrony of concept of the Tinker, this sort of very smart maker of things, and interesting results from the move. But I actually really like the version, quote unquote, of Act Under Fire in the game, because we made it trust fate to see you through. It's trust fate. And you roll with luck. And the nature of switching it so that you are relying on luck allows me to conceive of this move in a different sense than I often do, where when I'm acting under fire, I'm like, this is just pure survival, this is chance, this is risky, oh my gosh, I've got to just run from cover to cover. When I'm trying to keep my cool in Urban Shadows, that's kind of like, okay, I just gotta calm myself down, I gotta be solid about this, I gotta be careful. But trusting fate puts people into the mindset of understanding this is that swashbuckling madness, where when I dive out the window to try to roll onto the ground 20 feet below, I am trusting fate. That's okay. It's served by the moves. It's there. It's a valid choice. And some playbooks will be great at that. So you are then encouraged to think of yourself as somebody who does absolutely crazy things because you have a high luck stat. So you're going to be trusting in your luck to see you through more often than anything else.
Brennan, I was looking over the character sheets before recording, and I noticed that the harm track, well, there's multiple harm tracks. It's giving me some flashbacks to the early days of Fate. You want to expand upon that a little?
Yeah, so as I said before, in the board game, equipment is a huge part of the game, and we knew that that was going to be important coming into this. So we knew that we needed a way to represent the loss of equipment or the degradation of equipment, to have you pay attention to your own stuff and perhaps worry about getting money to maintain it or repair it or getting new things. So already we knew that there needed to be a way to represent equipment damage separate from any harm that you would take yourself. And ultimately, we wound up with 3 tracks: injury, exhaustion, and decay, to track the 3 different kinds of quote-unquote harm or your own resources that you could expend over the course of play, so that you would be constantly pushed and pulled by the need to restore these resources to take certain actions. So for example, exhaustion just is supposed to represent your character's tiredness. As you exert effort, you mark more boxes of exhaustion. Some special moves will have you marking boxes of exhaustion to get some special effect or power, and some of the traveling moves have you marking exhaustion. But the actual effect of all of this is that the best way to clear your exhaustion is to fulfill your nature. Everybody chooses a nature from your playbook at the start of play, and it'll give you a condition like the Scoundrel has Arsonist. Clear your exhaustion track when you destroy or grievously damage an important structure. So, you're going to fill that exhaustion track over the course of play, and then you're going to need to come back to town and perhaps maybe kind of sort of light fire to the town hall to fulfill your arsonist nature, thereby causing more trouble and more problems and more story while clearing your own exhaustion track. And that was what we really wanted, was these 3 different cycles that would constantly get you to do things like come back to a clearing. The best way to get medical attention and clear your injury is to come back to a clearing. The best way to clear your decay and repair your equipment or fill your pockets with gold and other items is to come back to a clearing and to actually exchange goods or get paid. And so all of this was our way of making sure that the vagabonds, despite being these outcasts, they actually can't just sit at home in the woods and be perfectly fine. They need to keep coming back to town and then going back out and doing adventures, and then coming back to town and then going back out and doing adventures. So these 3 different tracks are our ways of modulating 3 different ways of getting you to follow that cycle.
Amazing. I don't know about you, but I'm super excited to try out Root today. How about you, Brennan? Are you ready to run us some woodland adventures?
Absolutely.
It is time to act under fire.
It's time for our next segment, Act Under Fire, where Brennan is going to run for me a short play segment of Root. Where do you want to start, Brennan?
I have a little love letter here for your character. I think first maybe we should do a brief introduction to your character, just so everybody hears who they are and what's up with them on the basic level. I believe you're playing a ranger.
Sure thing. Yes, I'm definitely playing a ranger today. Her name is Zola, and she is a fox. I couldn't say no to foxes. They're so cute.
Perfectly valid. Yeah, that's the best way to choose your species. So Rangers are one of the 6 kinds of Vagabond playbook in the quick start materials. They will be in the core book of the actual main game, and they are these sort of stealthy figures who would prefer to sit in the woodland and be left alone. Obviously, based on that whole thing I just said, they can't just remain in the woodland alone as much as they would like. But out of everybody, they are some of the Vagabonds most at home in the forests between the different clearings. So, I have this little love letter here. Hello, Zola. You've undertaken a dangerous task for the Magistrate of Oakenhold. Many a traveler coming to and from Oakenhold has reported an attack from one of the most dangerous things you can find in the forest. A bear. Most escaped unscathed, abandoning carts and supplies and running for their lives. But the cost to Oakenhold and its commerce are becoming far too high to bear.
Womp womp.
I feel shame. Not least because the mouse folk of Oakenhold can't pay proper taxes to the resurgent Eyrie dynasties anymore. So Magistrate Redlace has hired you to deal with the bear. Find it and make it no longer an issue for Oakenhold, whatever it takes. Magistrate Redlace probably offered you a fat sack of dynasty royals as compensation, too. After all, you'd have to be crazy to go after a bear in the first place, so it better be worth your while. You've been tracking signs of the bear and its attacks through the forest as you plunge deeper and deeper into the woods. Let's see how that's been going for you. Roll plus cunning.
So, rolling cunning. Okay. That's a 4? I'm not that cunning.
Perfect. Okay, so on a hit, you would have found what looks like the bear's lair, and on a 10 plus or 7 to 9, you would have gotten some choices of the things you found, but a miss is good as well. On a miss, something finds you before you find the bear. Better knock an arrow, hero. We are here in the woods. You, Zola, with your leafy cloak, have been moving stealthily amid the trees for a while, following the signs of the damage and what tracks you could find. All of them seemed perhaps worn over by time, but also not quite what you would have expected. It's reasonable that these tracks were left here by the bear, but you haven't been able to be 100% sure because they weren't as clear as you would have hoped. But you've been tracing them as best you could until you have fallen into a place watching the ground to see if any sign of the bear comes past, because you have no more tracks to follow. They seem to have ended, and you can't see anything else that would suggest the bear. So you've taken up this position in a tree, looking for signs of the bear, when above you in the tree, you hear the click, the noticeable, recognizable click of a crossbow. And you hear a gruff voice say, "So, see anything you like down there?"
I'm seeing plenty of interesting things directly above me, Zola says, reaching for, I believe I have a bow myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have a longbow, not as fancy as a crossbow, but, still intimidating enough.
Very nice. So you are pulling out your longbow, and the voice says, Nah, we wouldn't want things to get messy, would we?
I wasn't the one who drew the first weapon.
For a moment, they pause, perhaps unsure of exactly how to respond to that. Yeah, but look, fact is, you're trespassing in here, you're the aggressor, and what's going to happen right now is we're going to come down from this tree, you're going to put your stuff on the ground, I'm going to take my pick, and then we can go on our merry way.
Do I have a good sight of where this person is above me?
Yes, so you are currently facing in the opposite direction, and out of sort of a sense of not wanting to provoke them to shoot or do anything untoward, you've probably been cautious so far. But you can spy out of the corner of your eye further up a figure in the tree holding the crossbow, the tip of the quarrel pointed down at you. Would you like to read a tense situation?
I would love to read a tense situation right now.
Now, this is also cunning.
This was significantly better. This was an 8.
Excellent. Okay, so on a 7 to 9, you get to ask one question from the list, and you will take +1 when acting on the answers. What would you like to ask?
What is the biggest threat right now?
Yes, very nice. Okay. The figure up above you has the drop on you, has the bow out and pointed down towards you. And so they seem to be the biggest threat right in front of you, except your very acute fox ears pick up something else moving across the forest ground nearby. It sounds large and heavy as it is snuffling its way towards you, and it very well might be that bear that you've been tracking.
So we touched earlier in the show about what bears are. So in a cultural sense to the characters in the universe of Root, what is a bear?
Yeah, so a bear is a dire threat. They live in the woods. They are not part of woodland society. They are not something you talk to or with. They are dangerous. They are huge and powerful. They are essentially kind of close to the role that something like a troll or an ogre might fulfill in a D&D.
Interesting. So in Zola's head right now, if they go down on the ground, they're going to have to deal with this bear.
Mm-hmm.
If she can knock this figure out of the tree and knock it down to the ground to leave it a little bit flat-footed or flat on its ass in front of the bear, then this person is going to be in a position to ask for help, to be in her control and her sway.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to do, and I'm going to describe what I want to do, and you can walk us through how this is going to roll out, is to quickly twist around on this tree branch and then hit the branch or whatever this other figure is standing on hard enough to knock it off balance and knock it to the ground.
Very nice. Okay. So I think there is a risk here of that crossbow being on you. Taking this action, this fast move risks them just pulling the trigger and you getting shot one way or another, no matter what, as long as they have that on you. Now, maybe if they were distracted first, then they wouldn't actually shoot, or they might drop the crossbow, or they might point it at something else. But the core thing you're trying to do here is you're trying to make the move, wreck something. When you wreck something, you're going to roll with might. That's going to be how you break the branch and drop them to the ground. So if you are good just trying to wreck it and taking that one crossbow shot, that works perfectly. One of the nice things you have is, I believe, some armor. I
do have chain armor.
Perfect, yes. So the equipment lists for the playbooks and the quick start all have their equipment set. In the full game, we'll be adjusting it so that you can make your own equipment. But for the moment, yes, you start with this chain armor, which will let you block some of the harm from that crossbow bolt one way or another. So if you're okay with just taking that hit, then wreck something. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to leave myself open to attack if it means, greater gains in the near future.
Perfect.
It was only a 4 again, though.
Uh-oh. Okay. So you swing your sword around, right, to strike that branch, and it flies through the air at the same time as the figure pulls the trigger on the crossbow bolt. That crossbow bolt is going to strike you at the same time as your sword is just smashing through the branch. So it is this phenomenal noise and crash as you are struck by the bolt. It embeds itself into your armor. You can, in this case, specifically choose to either mark one injury yourself, or you can mark one of the boxes of decay specific to your armor. Once all of the armor's boxes are full, it's pretty much destroyed. But until then, it can help just eat that damage so that you don't have to. However, the bolt knocks you off your branch at the same time that the one you struck just comes flying off the tree, and you and your new friend both come tumbling down to the ground below, striking with a heavy, hard thud. That is going to be a second injury that I would like you to either take on the armor or on your own injury track.
So Zola's armor is much worse for wear right now. I'm going to click off 2 boxes on that out of 3.
And your, again, new best friend is similarly rattled and hurt, groaning as he is picking himself up, his crossbow having been crushed beneath him. But the bear has heard the commotion, lets out a loud, rageful snarl, and begins bounding towards the two of you where you sit on the ground.
Do I have any moment of opportunity right now to have any tiny little bit of conversation with my new friend?
Yes. You have like 30 seconds before the bear is on you.
Oh, and for our audience, is it clear what type of creature my new friend is?
Oh, yes, absolutely. He's a badger.
What biases could Zola have about badgers in this world?
So badgers are not one of the primary denizens of the woodland. Those are going to be the foxes, the mice, the rabbits, and the birds. They are already more of an outskirts or rogue or not part of the main woodland society kind of species. They may have more enclaves elsewhere or hidden, but within the woodland they're viewed as slightly odd or just not part of good society.
Did my longsword get left in that tree branch? Is it long gone for the world?
No, you actually cleft straight through it. It fell next to you.
Zola, in these 30 seconds, pulls out her sword, points it at this badger, and says, "So we're either going to work together right now, or I'm going to mysteriously disappear into the woods, and you have to deal with this bear yourself." Try to persuade an NPC with intimidation in my threatening visage.
Love it. That is perfect. So normally persuading an NPC with promises or threats is going to be charm. However, because of your special move, when you persuade an NPC with open threats or naked steel, roll with might instead of charm.
Which would be great, except I rolled a 6.
So close. So, obviously, if we were playing with multiple characters, multiple PCs, I should say, it would be possible for you to help each other, which would allow you to mark exhaustion to give a fellow vagabond a +1 on their roll, as long as there's something you can actually do to help. So if you had another vagabond friend who is a PC right now, that could take that 6 to a 7. But for our purposes, the badger sees your sword, sees the oncoming bear, looks back at your face, this weathered and serious face, this intense face, this frightening face. And the badger gets up and bolts into the woods, yelping.
Coward!
You get out, coward, right before the bear is upon you. It roars, rears up on its back legs, and it's going to fall directly upon you. What do you do?
Yeah, first thing I do is switch out my dice, because holy crud.
Yeah, that's fair.
Do bears carry swords or weapons? What would combat look like with a bear?
Sure. So the core, quote-unquote, weapon moves are engage sword to sword, target someone, which is essentially what you use when you're using a bow or other ranged weapon, and grapple an enemy. Where grapple an enemy is when you are rolling around with them up close, wrestling, very, very tight kind of fighting. Engage sword to sword is kind of a open-ended, this is the move you would use when you pull out a sword and your enemy is kind of at sword range and has the equivalent of a sword. So if one of you had an axe and one of you had a hammer, it's still engaging sword to sword. You, with your sword, would engage sword to sword with the bear, who has claws and teeth, the equivalent of a sword for them, if that was what you wanted to do right now, if you wanted to straight up fight them. You could try to get in real close and grapple with the bear, which is dangerous in its own right. Bear wrestling, I hear, may not end well for the wrestler. Or you could try to get out of here and maybe put some distance between you and then target the bear using your bow, keeping them at far range. The bear's not going to be able to do anything as long as you can maintain that distance.
After having a quick review of my moves, I think gaining some distance, getting either deeper into the bushes away from the bear or up into a tree is going to be what Zola does next, because I have Silent Pause, which allows me to quickly disengage from dangerous situations, I believe.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So, you are adept at slipping into and out of dangerous situations without anyone noticing. When you attempt roguish feats relying on stealth, you can mark exhaustion to choose one fewer item from the list. So attempting roguish feats is the basic move for basically anything roguish. It's pickpocketing, it's disarming traps, it's getting into a vault, it's sneaking past the guards. In this case, if you wanted to try to slip out of the bear's notice, that absolutely would be a roguish feat. However, I think right now, with you right underneath it, very clearly visible, you need to give yourself this opportunity to disappear from its notice. You need to put some distance between you and it, and then get into the woods where you could attempt the roguish feats to just fully disappear. So first up, I'm going to ask you, if you're just trying to get away from it as it's plummeting down on you, that's trusting fate. That's this risk as it is coming down and you are just desperately trying to get out at the last minute.
I'm definitely feeling lucky, so let's roll with some luck. I am feeling 9 lucky today.
Very nice. Okay, so on a hit, you scrape by. The GM will tell you what it costs you. So you are rolling out of the way as the bear is falling, and its claws come right down on your leafy cape. If you keep rolling, you'll get away, but that cape is going to tear free of your shoulders, and it's going to be left in the bear's paws.
Capes are just temporary pieces of clothing anyway. We're going to leave that cape behind.
Perfect.
I'll deal with the emotional anguish about that later.
About your special leafy cape. Perfect.
Symbol of my homeland.
All right, so the bear even is thrown for a second. It attacks the cape, not fully realizing that you've gotten away. As you roll and get up a good distance away, if you want to try to slip into the woods unnoticed, now's your chance.
And we're going to attempt a roguish feat, trying to get kind of a little bit of ground. Maybe there's like a rocky outcrop I can get upon.
Perfect.
Enough shadows. Yes, there is. 11.
Very nice. Okay, so on a hit, you achieve your goal without being noticed so far. In this case, since your goal is explicitly to just get away, move into shadows where no one is noticing you, that's perfect. You slip into the shadows, you can crawl up a tree, and the bear has no idea where you've gone. But you have to pick one out of 3 options. You don't have a clear path of escape, you use up some resources in the attempt, mark decay, or you leave evidence of your roguery behind, something by which the bear might be able to track you.
Is it possible for me to mark exhaustion to not have to pick an option?
Yes, because you have the special move that enables you to do so.
So, no consequences for me.
That is exactly right. You slip away perfectly, no consequences, a little tired, a little out of breath as you quickly sprinted up that tree. But the bear has no idea where you've gone, lets out a little bit of a roar before it hears your badger friend yelp a little bit again in the distance, and then charges off after him.
So I also have Darkened Blade, which feeds into the weapon moves a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's if my enemy or my target is unaware of my position, I can use Murder as a weapon skill with a ranged weapon, I believe.
Yes, you can use Murder with weapons tagged for close range instead of just intimate range.
Darn it.
On a miss, you can mark exhaustion to remain hidden from your foes. So, if you're okay with dropping out of the tree onto the bear, you could try to murder it as it gets by. It's still potentially dangerous, but you have a chance for that with your sword. Your sword, to be clear, is normally marked for close range. You normally couldn't use it for the murder move. You would need a dagger or something for intimate.
Oh, I think we're going to do a death from above situation here. Zola's had just about enough of these shenanigans and wants to end this quickly and swiftly.
Perfect.
So that's rolling with cunning?
Yes, it is rolling with cunning.
So that is a 7.
Oh, perfect. Okay. On a hit, your foe dies. There you go. On a 10 plus, you would have had the choice to remain hidden or to clear a path for your allies in addition. But in this case, you leap out of the tree and we see you come down with your sword onto the bear. I imagine you like landing on its back, the sword driving through its neck. And it slumps forward onto the ground, slides a bit as you just stand up and do that awesome, super cool hero pose atop it.
Amazing. How does the badger react?
The badger, who had fallen, was a few moments away from being eaten by this bear, was trying to clamber away at the last second, sees you fall out of the tree, kill the bear, stand atop it looking awesome, and just says, you know what, I've reconsidered. You can leave the woods without any toll at all. It'll be fine.
Sola notes and goes, yeah, note it. Make sure I don't see you around these parts anymore, though. Private property, God.
Yes, absolutely. You got it. I will not be here. I will move to the other end of the woodland right away. Yes, good day to you. Goodbye. And just runs.
That was so good.
All right. And the bear is dead. So now you would be able to go back to Magistrate Redlace, perhaps pick up that big sack of Dynasty Royals. Of course, there's every likelihood that there may be more going on with this, and perhaps Magistrate Redlace never expected you to come back, but we would have to deal with that on next time.
Leaving me on a cliffhanger there. Thank you so much today, Brennan. If people are looking to find out more about Root or check out the Kickstarter, where can they go?
So it should be live on Kickstarter until October 20th. We will have on the Kickstarter page a link so that you can download the Root Quick Start right away. It will also be hosted on DriveThruRPG, so you can find it if you go straight there. Just search for Root, the tabletop role-playing game Quick Start, and you'll be able to download it for free. It has all 6 playbooks, it has all of the basic moves, it has a whole set of weapon moves, it has everything you need so you can play at least 1, 2, or 3 sessions. Obviously, we're still playtesting, refining, getting it all perfect, so it is subject to change, but it should give you a very good sense of what the game will be like, what we're shooting for, and it gives you a whole ton of systems for creating your own version of the clearing, using randomized tables to create new situations to start play, all manner of good stuff. So if you want to know about the game, I highly suggest checking out the Kickstarter page for a whole bunch of information and then downloading the Quick Start and giving that a read.
And if our listeners are looking to see a bit more of your work, maybe on social media, where can they find you?
I primarily show up on the Magpie Games feeds. That's at Magpie Official on Twitter in particular, and we also have a Facebook page for Magpie Games. What we are working on, what I'm doing, we talk about it there. We just recently announced a whole new slate of products for the next couple of years. So anything new, interesting, or awesome, we'll talk about there.
Fabulous, and thank you once again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hello, listeners. This coming October, the Gauntlet will once again be putting on GauntletCon, our online gaming convention. GauntletCon will include guests, panels, a dedicated Discord server for mustering, and lots of RPG sessions. Many will be streamed and recorded. GauntletCon runs October 24th through 27th, with events throughout those days to cover many time zones. If you're interested in our newsletter for GauntletCon, you can sign up at gauntlet-rpg.com/gauntlet-con-2019. GauntletCon's a great gaming experience, and I hope you'll consider joining us as a GM, a player, or a viewer.